celebrate extraction report for Robert Baker's Samsung S8, item number 121. It's one page. May it be marked, please, as People's 271.
Yes.
Detective, showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 271. Top of this document reads, celebrate creation time 11/28 of 2016 at 2:16 in the morning, which would be California time. And this is for a Google Android. Do you know what this document reflects?
Yes.
No foundation.
Oh,
And what is that?
That is an extraction from Robert Baker's cell phone, his Samsung cell phone, and he is creating a lifestyle lounge account.
Did you also review information or what's referred to as an image file from the defendant's computer, that being an HP desktop that was in the second floor of the Sementilli residence that was booked as item number 88?
I did.
And was there information on that computer that pertained to things such as Bike Week in Myrtle Beach?
Yes.
Did it also...
I'm going to object to a motion to strike. There's no foundation, there's no report, and nothing to indicate that witness has the ability to make those conclusions.
are you done with your speaking objection? Have we talked about this before?
We have, and I was trying to figure out the exact words we use for the exact.
Overruled.
Again, in reviewing the image file, you caused that computer as well as various electronic devices to be reprocessed throughout the time that you handled the case, correct?
That's correct.
What is the point of reprocessing various devices once they've been processed the first time?
It's to use the newest technology in order to extract additional information that may not have been captured on the first try at processing the item, and a lot of times we'll get items that were previously deleted or didn't show up in the first capture.
So, in other words, as you use newer software programs or updated programs, you're able to perhaps find more data in what's referred to as the unallocated space on devices, correct?
Correct.
Areas where items have been deleted but maybe not yet written over.
Correct.
And in each of these cases were reports written for the prosecution and the defense with respect to the actual processing of all of these devices.
Yes, they were.
And with respect to, again, the HP desktop item number 88, was there also various searches for queries through the computer for life insurance paid when a person who has a life insurance policy is murdered, in cases of murder?
Your Honor, no objection. This would be based on hearsay.
It's overruled.
No foundation.
Again, it's overruled.
Yes.
Okay. And was some of those searches, were those occurring on May 21st of 2017 after Mr. Sementilli's murder.
That's correct.
Were there also various searches on February 12th of 2017 for secured online solutions for transferring large volumes of encrypted or sensitive data?
There was.
And was there also, even as late as June 4th of 2017, searches for lifestyle lounge and the chat feature, member chat ID information?
Yes.
I have nothing further.
Yeah, Cross.
Detective, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
Feel like before I'm done, I will have questioned every robbery homicide detective in the LAPD.
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object to counsel testifying.
It was not meant in bad faith. That's all right.
Did you perform the examination of the item that you just referenced, which was what, a laptop computer, did you say?
It was a desktop computer.
Desktop.
I did not extract the information, but I did look at the results from that extraction.
And who did the extraction?
I believe the first time around it was Detective George Diaz, and the second time around, I want to say his first name was David. It was a detective. I can't recall his last name at this point.
Are they still active detectives or officers in the Los Angeles Police Department?
I believe they both have retired.
Okay. And were you present when they conducted their examinations?
Not the extraction. It's a process, from my understanding, that takes a considerable amount of time, but I did drop off all the information to them. They pick up the item from our property division, and then when the download is ready, I pick up the hard drive.
Okay, and so basically they gave you the results.
Yes, they did.
And this was with new technology, you said?
Yes.
And obviously, I wouldn't say obviously, but your background and training is not in this field of examination. You would not have been able to do this examination yourself.
I would not be able to do the extraction.
But you could read it. They gave you the results, and then that's what you're relating here today. Is that correct?
Correct. The results and their accompanied report.
Okay. And is the computer still available to be examined as it was back then? Do you know?
I believe so. There's no reason that it shouldn't be.
Could be approached reasonably, sure.
When you're ready. Continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, Detective Roberts, you were present the last several days while these overhears were being played to the jury. Is that correct?
Correct.
And your role in obtaining those overhears was what?
Well, I didn't really have a role in obtaining them because they were obtained prior to me being assigned to the case.
Do you know how they were obtained?
I spoke to Detective Gable and Tellis on occasion, and they basically, when the defendants were scheduled to appear in various court hearings, they were placed in cells near or next to each other, and the cells were recorded.
Okay, and that took place in the lockups at the various courthouses, is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Were they placed there intentionally so that the recordings could be made of their conversations?
Yes.
So, as I think you said, only in certain cases do you go to, or do the detectives go through that procedure in order to obtain, they believe, communications between the two parties. Is that correct?
I don't know that I testified to that, but
I thought you said only in certain cases is this conduct or form of investigation conducted, and where you listen to the interchanges, if any, between inmates in the county jail.
Testimony, counsel.
I believe that was Detective Farrell.
Oh, fine. Okay, well, he's right here. If I could ask him. All right. So you don't listen to the results of those recordings, I take it, in mass, in determining which ones to select or play or so forth, do you?
I listened to every recording of the overhears multiple times.
So everyone is much more than in the ones we've heard in this case, correct?
Well, those recordings were tailored for this. They were cut down for this hearing. There's a lot of stuff that we did not hear in those recordings.
Tailored down by who?
I believe the prosecution.
Okay. So the raw material, which is every recording that is captured, is turned over to the prosecution, and they then determine which ones they will ask to be introduced into evidence or played to the jury, correct?
That's not correct. Let me give the jury their lunch break.
Again.
One moment, I'm talking. We're going to adjourn for lunch as far as you're concerned. Until 1:30, the admission applies. Don't discuss this case among yourselves with anyone else or form express an opinion until the cause is finally submitted to you. Have a good lunch. I'll see you at 1:30. Present, jury, and also present. Good afternoon. Mr. Levine, you may continue.
Thank you. Detective Roberts, so when you took over this case, give us again the approximate date that was.
It was approximately October of 2019.
Okay. So it was 2 years after the arrests of Monica Sementilli and Robert Baker, correct?
A little over that, but yeah,
Okay.
give or take.
And the prosecution was pending, shall we say?
Correct.
Okay. What was your role then at that time on the case?
It was to obviously assist with the prosecution. There was still a lot of interviews and investigative things that need to be done on the case that was already pending, as well as suspects still outstanding that we were trying to identify and take into custody.
And eventually that person was identified as Christopher Austin, is that right?
One of them, yes.
Yes. Well, the missing murderer, killer, was Christopher Austin, correct?
The person seen in the video was Christopher Austin, yes.
And you are aware that he has since pled guilty or no contest to the murder?
Yes. There is a deal in.
Right, that's fine, we can talk about it. He's pled and he won't be sentenced till after the trial is over, and the deal has to do with less time that he would do than if he had normally just been charged and convicted.
Objection seems facts not in evidence.
Sustain.
And
Are you aware?
approach.
You going to approach? All right.
Detective Roberts, we'll get back to the deal. Let me correct one thing in the questioning that I had for you before we broke for lunch, and that was relating to all the calls and contact between Mr. Baker and the defendant, Ms. Sementilli, that was tape recorded in the jail cells and everywhere else in custody, as many as you could, and which were reviewed by you, and eventually some of them played before the jury, correct?
Correct. We're speaking of just the cell overhears?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
We'll call those overhears, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I had talked about that, the decision to which one of the, if we had played all of them, we'd be here days or weeks, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So a decision was made on which ones to play, and I said that was made by the prosecution, and actually it was joined by the judge and the prosecutor in terms of which items would be played before the jury and which would not, correct?
Yes, and I think there was certain parameters that the court had placed as well, limiting what the court saw appropriate for us to play.
Sure, and that had involved some explicit language is part of it, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But you're satisfied that the items that were relevant to this case were played before the jury in the last couple of days. Is that correct?
Chapter relevant.
I'll withdraw that. You heard all the tapes that were played to the jury.
Yes, I did.
Okay. So knowing that those were not all of them, can you tell us the last date that contact between overhears between the defendant and Mr. Baker took place?
And we're talking still just the overhears, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to say that it was January 2018, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And I assume then that there were no more overhears obtained from that day to now. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So between January 2018 and March 2025, as far as you know, there was no communications overhears between the defendant and Mr. Baker. Is that correct?
Object, it's leading.
I'm sorry?
And it assumes facts not in evidence.
Still ruled.
As far as overhears, I do believe that's the last.
Okay. And I take it that any additional overhears would have been recorded just like the ones that were played before the jury in the last few days, as well as the ones that were not. You follow my question?
If I agree with that, if they were determined to have evidentiary value that
Okay.
was important for the jury to hear.
Did this system of overhears, can you tell us briefly what that involved? How the law enforcement or the jail obtained those overhears?
So they were placed, the recording instrument was placed in the cells before the defendants were placed in the cells?
Which cells are we talking about? Because weren't they housed in different
Okay.
locations?
Well, it was the time, okay, so we're going to go all the way back.
Sure, to
On the
their
days, sure. The defendants would appear in court together for preliminary hearing settings and things like that, motions, whatever.
Just like a courtroom like this?
Just like a courtroom like this.
Okay.
And on the days that we knew that they were going, or the detectives then knew that they were going to be at court on the same days, they would place them in cells adjacent to each other or either across or next to each other. And those cells were outfitted with recording devices.
So law enforcement or the jail personnel intentionally placed, at that point, the two defendants in the case close to each other, whereas normally that might not have been the case with normal inmates. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And then the listening devices were placed in there, which also would not ordinarily be the case with normal inmates, correct?
Well,
I mean, if
I
you
don't
had
know
two-
about normal, but you can request it. I could request overhears in any of my cases. It's up to the detective whether that's something they want to do in their case.
Okay, and I think we heard that this is only done in special cases, serious cases like this one.
I have to disagree with that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's basically...
You're complaining this with the Perkins operations?
No, I'm talking about the overhears.
I understand what you're talking about, but what you said, very well.
Did I say the
I'll let go.
Perkins?
No, you did not say that, but
Okay.
very well.
Just like the Perkins operations. Is that
I
a
think
fair statement?
no, I think the Perkins are different because the resources are limited. There's one team for not only for our entire LAPD, but a lot of times they work for the entire state and city. Whereas the overhears are case specific, and it's really up to the detective in their case if they think they need additional evidence and that their defendants might talk to one another, that is something that they can request to be done.
Okay. So in both cases, the goal is to get additional evidence that they think they may need before they go to trial, correct?
The goal is to get additional evidence.
Okay. And in this case, the additional evidence was Mr. Baker and Ms. Sementilli, correct? Those were the two defendants who were the subject matter of this undercover procedure, shall we call it?
That is correct.
Okay. But in Mr. Baker's case, you knew, by the time you came on, that his DNA, his blood had been matched by DNA to blood basically all over the victim's house the night of the murder, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So there was plenty of evidence there to convict Mr. Baker. Fair statement?
It's irrelevant for opinion as to that.
Sustained.
Okay. What you were really looking for, and I mean in the entire LAPD District Attorney's Office, was additional evidence against Ms. Sementilli, who obviously her blood and so forth was not found in the house and was not present during the murder, correct?
I disagree.
Okay. In fact, from the very beginning of the case, and I'm referring back to February 14, 2017, when the DNA was first matched to Mr. Baker, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I know it had to then be tested more, but
Sure.
on that date, the LAPD was pretty confident they had one of the murderers, correct?
Yes.
But, as we've heard, he was not arrested, was he?
That's correct.
Now, I know this wasn't your decision, but the decision of LAPD was to leave him on the street, as well as obviously the unidentified second murderer, in order to get more evidence against Ms. Sementilli.
I believe.
Compound and also assumes facts and evidence with respect to this.
Overruled.
I believe that the goal was to identify and get everybody that was a participant in this murder.
Of course. And the only evidence in general at that time connecting Ms. Sementilli to the murder was that she was having an affair with Mr. Baker. Correct?
I would have to refer back to the timeline. I'm not sure if they had the phone records at that point.
Okay. And obviously, phone records were obtained. We've heard testimony about them throughout the investigation. Correct?
Correct.
And those phone records, to a large extent, documented contact between Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker both on encrypted phones and non-encrypted phones, correct?
Encrypted applications.
Okay, fine. So that was additional evidence that was being sought, correct?
Yes,
But that could have been obtained whether or not Miss Sementilli was in custody or not, right?
I believe it was obtained.
Right,
When
and
she
she was
was-
not in custody.
Correct.
Right. Had she been in custody, had you decided to arrest her and Mr. Baker, that information could have been obtained as well from her phones.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Jack on them.
So, really.
Okay. So, in essence, you had Mr. Baker, but LAPD engaged in a detailed and I assume extensive and costly surveillance of Ms. Sementilli for the 4 months almost, or 4 months leading up to her arrest in June of the same year, correct?
I believe that the surveillance was directed at Mr. Baker and Mrs. Sementilli, not in an effort to get all the parties involved in the murder and to try and figure out what everybody's role was in the murders.
Okay, well, you knew Mr. Baker's role was killing Fabio Sementilli on the night of the incident, correct?
Well, we know he was there in the house and was most likely the person that killed
Okay.
Mr. Sementilli.
By the way, did you, was one of the goals also, when you came on the scene, to locate, if you could, and determine what the murder weapon or weapons were in the case?
Trying to locate a murder weapon, yes.
So as far as you knew, when you came in what year now and month?
The end of 2019?
2019. This is 2 years after the arrest, correct?
Correct, a little over 2 years.
Neither murder weapon had been identified or recovered, correct?
Correct.
And that included knives that you had seized during the course of arrests and search warrants and so forth, correct?
There had been no knives that were identified as being the murder weapon in this case.
And that included a knife that was recovered from the vehicle being driven by Mr. Baker, in which Mr. Baker and Ms. Sementilli were arrested in June of 2017, correct?
Yes, I had no knowledge that that was the murder weapon in this case.
Did you have, could I see Exhibit 56? I apologize for not giving you the zoom here on that. My trusted co-counsel here is going to put this item up. Exhibit 155. Have you seen that item before that is depicted in that photograph?
I have.
And when did you first see it?
I believe when I got the case, it was part of the crime scene photos. Or not crime scene photos, but the evidence. If this is the knife I believe I'm looking at, it was recovered from the Mustang upon the arrest of Robert Baker and Monica Sementilli.
Okay, and that was on June 14, 2017.
Correct.
And did you investigate whether that was one of the knives used in the murder?
I did not. It was my understanding when I came on the case that this the knife had already been analyzed and
Excluded.
I don't know, excluded, but it wasn't included. Not included or excluded. It just there was nothing to positively say that this was the murder weapon.
Did you review the reports of Detective Gable, who was on the case before you as part of your bringing you up to speed on the investigation in the case?
I mean, there were over 220,000 documents in this case. I'm sure I did, but I can't remember everything that he wrote.
All right, but I'm sure, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you came into the case 2 years later and 2 years after this exhibit was recovered, that you investigated whether that exhibit had been identified as possibly being the murder weapon or not the murder weapon, correct?
I did not investigate this weapon.
Were you aware that Detective Gable had excluded it as the possible murder weapon?
I w-
Object that assumes facts not evidence.
Overruled.
I wasn't aware that he excluded it. I was aware that there was testing and that there was nothing found in that testing that could say that this was positively the murder weapon.
And where did you get that information from?
That was in the investigative files.
Well, you didn't read a Cron report or a report of Gable that said it had been excluded?
I don't remember reading a report that said it was excluded. I'm not saying the report doesn't exist. I don't remember reading that report.
Okay. You knew it had been tested for DNA and that was negative.
Correct.
You knew that the coroner's report had indicated the knife that was used was a serrated edged knife.
I'm going to object that assumes facts not evidence and misstates the evidence.
Overruled.
I would have to refresh my memory on that.
Did you review the autopsy report of the medical examiner?
I did.
And I assume, did you mark this report?
Which document?
Yes.
The autopsy report itself, I do not think the report was marked.
Right, the 621.
That's not the autopsy report.
Exhibit or non-exhibit, it may have been. Do you recognize this report?
I'm going to object again, assumes facts not evidence and
Sus-
misstates the evidence. It's not a
Sustained.
report.
I understand. Sustained.
I showed you an item. Have you seen that item before?
I have.
And this is an item that was prepared by either Detective Fillmore or Detective Plurdy, correct? Or officer.
It's speculative as to this witness.
Sustained.
Are there names on the report?
They are.
Okay. And you read the report?
Again, Your Honor, I object it misstates the evidence.
Sustained.
You didn't read the report?
Okay,
I'm sorry. You didn't read we'll call it a piece of paper. Okay? A piece of paper. Did you read this piece of paper?
I read the notes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And partly based on that and the DNA results, that weapon was excluded as a possible murder weapon in this case. Isn't that true?
Based on those notes?
Based on those notes, DNA, and whatever other information you had, you were aware that it was excluded as the murder weapon.
Objection compound.
It's overruled.
I didn't put any weight into those notes, and that's an honest answer, because I go by the official coroner's report and what the coroner says. Honestly, I rarely even look at the notes from an investigator that attended an autopsy, because I've attended autopsies, and it's really for my sort of, for me, it's a baseline as I'm waiting for the coroner's report to come in.
Okay.
I don't take a lot of time to be accurate. I don't put wounds exactly where they are on the body.
You're not trained to do that.
Well, I'm trained to take notes, but I'm not
to do
trained
autopsy.
to do an autopsy, no.
Okay. So obviously, you're not doing the autopsy. You're relying on the medical examiner to do the autopsy, correct?
Yes, and to complete a thorough report is my
Right.
hope, yes.
And have you ever been one of the officers assigned to attend an autopsy in a case where the culprit or the suspect had not yet been arrested? In other words, an investigation? Or
Yes,
identified?
yes.
And you're aware that in serious cases where it's still the case hasn't been solved, sometimes LAPD officers attend autopsies, correct?
It's actually, we're required to attend.
Who requires you to?
Our department, the LAPD. I mean, there's certain circumstances if we can't, but even like in this case, when the investigative officer wasn't available, he sent another officer to attend that autopsy.
Okay, and the investigating officer at the time was Parshall, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
and Verna.
And were you aware that officers or investigators Plurdy and Fillmore were told to attend the autopsy?
Objection. Calls for speculation, hearsay.
Sustained on the first ground only.
All right. So when you go and you attend the autopsy, do you reach your own conclusions about the size of the wounds or where they were or what weapon possibly created the wound?
Objection irrelevant.
I don't allow this.
No.
You rely on the medical examiner.
Yes.
And do you take notes of what he is saying, or do you interview him afterwards, or how do you obtain his opinions on the crucial issues that you're there to observe?
I take preliminary notes just for my sort of edification, and
Based on what, if I could interrupt you?
it's based on, sometimes it's based on conversations with the doctor, sometimes it's based on visual observations in the autopsy suite.
But I take it you don't make, put down opinions as to what type of weapon, in this case a knife, was used to commit the murder, do you?
If it was something that was discussed with the doctor, I would.
Okay. So it's discussed with the doctor, and then you write a piece of paper that you turn in to the investigator, or who?
So I've never seen notes written on an autopsy like that piece of paper that you showed me.
Is there some reason why this would not be appropriate?
No, it's not that it's not appropriate. It's just not. It's not the way that I've seen it done.
How have you seen it done?
So when you go in for an autopsy, there's a
Not personally, when you go to the
yeah.
I'm going to object and ask if the witness could just finish her answer.
He's allowing that. He's allowing it.
Go on.
There's a little room that you go into where you put on protective clothing, and in that room, all of the forms that the doctor uses are available because the doctors go in there to change and they get their reports there, and we're allowed to take them. And most investigators will usually take I don't recall the exact number, but it has the body, has a version of the body, it has a head, it has a picture of things, and I scribble my notes on that as close as I can to what my victim looks like on in the autopsy suite.
So just for example, I'm not marking this, but this appears to be an autopsy report, something like that, with the, right?
Correct.
And this is the body
Yeah.
drawn,
Right.
and then the notes are put on there, correct?
Yeah.
What
Yes.
do you do, however, whatever you call it, and whatever piece of paper is put on, what do you do with it when you've completed it?
There's a section within the murder book for the autopsy, and I'll usually either put it in that section, or I'll put it, there's also a section in the murder book for notes. It's up to the individual detective how they want to organize their murder book.
So in this case, if any notes were taken on the autopsy of Fabio Sementilli, it would be up to Detective Parshall as to where he put those notes or pieces of paper, correct?
Correct, and then in that instance, he could even put it, there's a section for other officers' reports. He could have put it in there. It's really up to him.
Now, in your investigation, which included, you said, trying to find out if you could locate the murder weapon, did you review the autopsy report?
I did.
And did you ever see the document that I showed you, the piece of paper prepared by Detective Officer Fillmore or Plurdy?
I'm sure I did. I don't recall it.
Well, after viewing it, didn't it play a role in the exclusion of item 155 that's above you, at Exhibit 155, as being the murder weapon?
I can't really testify to that because I didn't exclude the knife, so I don't know what was played in the exclusion of this knife.
And eventually, Mr. Austin, are you aware, following his deal, identified that as one of the murder weapons, 155, correct?
I believe he said the knife looked like that. I'm not sure that he identified this specific knife, but I believe that he was shown a picture of the knife that was recovered from the Mustang, and he said, yes, the knife looked like that.
What if I told you he was shown the knife and asked if that was the knife used in the murder, and he said yes? Didn't you see that in the transcript of the proffer?
I don't recall.
Did you read the proffer?
I did not read the proffer. I read the interview and the Perkins.
So when you came on the scene as the investigating officer, is it fair to say you were still looking for the murder weapon?
Yes.
All right. You had no note in your report that murder weapon was found in the Mustang driven by Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker?
Correct.
Now, you were still obviously looking for the second. Well, let me ask you this. So, did you review all of the surveillance, the results of the surveillance and whatever other investigation took place during the 4-month period between the time of the murder and the arrest of Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker?
Are you talking about all the surveillance even prior to the murder?
Well, how much surveillance was there?
Well, there was all the video that was captured on the day of the murder, of course. And then there was some video and photographs that were captured from GND when they followed the defendants, and SIS when they followed the defendants.
Okay, and was there any evidence during the surveillance that established anything other than they were having an affair? Regarding Ms. Sementilli?
Well, yes, I would say of course, in the video that was the day of the murder, I think there's a lot of stuff that corroborates that Mrs. Sementilli was
Well,
involved.
we all know about the
Okay.
day of the murder and what was recovered and so forth, and the DNA and everything else. I'm talking about following the decision not to arrest either defendant, but especially Mr. Baker. During that 4-month surveillance period, was any evidence recovered tying Ms. Sementilli to the murder?
Circumstantial, I think, evidence.
What, that they
In
were
my mind.
having an affair?
I don't think that the way that Ms. Sementilli was behaving is something that I would expect somebody that lost their husband to behave.
Fair enough. And you believe that because she was cheating on her husband even before the murder and continued to commit adultery, really, before and then cheating afterwards, that meant she was likely to murder.
It was very suspicious. It was circumstantial evidence that went in the box that included her and did not exclude her. And you keep putting stuff on one side, exclude, include. And
Okay.
it was evidence that included her.
And you put the affair as include in the box.
I put the post-murder behavior
Right.
in the box that included.
Well, let me ask you this. You've done a lot of murder investigations, I assume, correct?
Yeah.
And
Subjective.
a lot of questions, hypotheses, hypothetical questions were asked. One of the things a murder person who planned a murder with her lover would have done is maybe have no contact with him after the murder to make sure there was no evidence against her, right?
I'm going to object. That calls for speculation.
Sustained.
In fact, in this case, Ms. Sementilli invited or allowed Mr. Baker to come to the house 1 or 2 days after the murder itself when others were paying their respects, correct? You were aware of that, right?
Yes, he did come to the house during the memorial.
Were you aware that he had also sent a message saying, "I'm sorry"?
What I'm aware of is that there was a message that was deleted right before the "I'm sorry," so I have no context for what that "I'm sorry" meant. It could mean
Okay. But it was sent by Mr. Baker and it was sent to Ms. Sementilli the day after the murder, is that right? Or the day of the murder?
I don't think it was the day of the murder. It was either the day after or 2 days after.
But after it was common knowledge in the press and so forth that Fabio Sementilli had been killed.
Correct.
Okay. At any time were wiretaps sought to tap the phones or the car or anything else of Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker to see what they were saying to each other?
There were no wiretaps in this case.
But there were tracking devices, correct?
Correct.
And that was to determine where they were going?
Yes, because I believe they were trying to identify the outstanding suspects.
Okay. And at times, an undercover officer was actually stationed in an automobile right next to where Miss Sementilli was
Yes.
parked, correct?
Right.
And she was crying, looking at her phone, and was overheard saying, "How could I be so stupid?" Right?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. This one is just cumulative.
It's overruled.
Isn't that right?
Yes, I remember that.
Were any other statements overheard, as far as you know, during this 4-month surveillance?
I don't recall.
I mean, they were seen going to restaurants and bars, correct?
Correct.
Miss Sementilli was seen grabbing the genital area or hugging a bouncer, correct?
Correct.
So there was a lot of evidence that was found basically showing her acting somewhat promiscuous and certainly still having Robert Baker as her lover, correct?
Yes, there was.
And you consider that proof that she was in on the murder?
I considered her behavior as suspicious, and it could not exclude her from being in on the murder.
And excluder became an important issue in the case as it related to insurance proceeds, correct?
I believe that was something that she wanted to happen.
Well, if she was not involved with the murder, she was entitled to her insurance, correct?
Correct.
And half of it was going to the children, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And you were aware that she had made several requests of law enforcement as to what was going on with the investigation.
Sure.
And in fact, there were tape recordings of numerous calls made to Detective Parshall back and forth in which insurance was discussed, correct?
Yes,
Did you listen to those calls?
I did.
And isn't it true that throughout those calls as well, or in many of them, she was inquiring what's going on with the investigation? Where is the person who did this? What progress are you making, correct?
I believe that she was trying to find out. Again, the behavior on those phone calls put her in the included box.
So you're saying that an innocent person whose husband was killed would not have been, after 3, 4, 4 months, hounding the police to find out if they'd made any progress in the murder investigation?
I'm going to call object calls for speculation.
It's argumentative, so stand on that ground.
But you are aware that every time she called and asked about that, there was a ruse going on by Detective Parshall and the other officers.
Yes,
And the ruse was to have her keep believing that they were making progress yes, we've compared the DNA, but it only shows it matches Fabio. We're getting close. We're almost there. You're aware that that was continuously told to her throughout that 4-month period, right?
Yes.
And then it was not unusual for her to call in a few weeks and say, so what happened, right?
I think there was an intense focus on the insurance and collecting the insurance money, and it became suspicious because of how often it was brought up not only to the detectives, but to the Wella executives, to the Wella HR people, to family members, that it was brought up so much that, again, it became more than what you would expect from a normal person that wasn't involved in the murder.
Well, but your opinion was somewhat colored by the fact that she was having an affair with Baker as well, correct?
My opinion is colored by the circumstantial evidence that I believe points
Okay.
to her having something to do with this murder.
But what if I told you that the majority of those calls, tape recorded to Barshal, focus on what's going on with the case? When are you going to find who did this, as much, if not more, than talking about insurance?
I listened to all the calls. I think we have a different interpretation or opinion of those calls.
All right, so the calls would speak for themselves, correct?
Yes.
In the beginning, she needed help in figuring out how to file for the insurance with MetLife to begin with, correct?
I'm going to object. Calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, at some point, wasn't she informed by Detective Parshall or LAPD that they had to submit something to MetLife, in effect clearing her before the insurance could be paid?
Same objection.
Overruled.
I think that was something that Parshall was saying LAPD had to submit, correct?
Yes. Okay. So that was another reason for her to keep calling and finding out if you submitted this to MetLife, yet that we've been cleared, including her children, right?
I mean, again, we have different opinions on.
I'm not talking about the amount of time, but that was
Okay.
one of the subjects that was raised in her
Sure.
calls as to whether or not MetLife had been notified that she had been cleared so they could issue the check.
Correct.
And in fact, one time she got very upset and said, "Can't you even clear my children? Are they suspects?" Remember that?
Yes,
Remember what the answer was?
I do not.
We're working on it. You think it's unusual for a mother to want her children, 16 and 18 years old, to be paid their share of life insurance?
Again, Your Honor, I could object. It's irrelevant. It's also argumentative.
Sustained on the second ground.
So getting back to the murder investigation, in all the 4 months that this surveillance was going on, was there one time when Miss Sementilli was overheard saying anything to the effect of, "Why did we do it? Why did I kill him? I killed him," anything verbally that she said during those 4 months surveillance that was a confession to being involved in the murder of her husband?
Well, I can't answer that because there were things that were deleted and apps that were deleted, and I don't know what
Okay,
all was said.
fair enough, but live surveillance could not be deleted, could it?
Correct.
And people and officers in cars sitting next to them and overhearing and so forth, that couldn't be deleted either, could it?
Right.
So, whatever the reasons, there was no evidence gathered in which Miss Sementilli was overheard telling Mr. Baker or anyone else that she had been involved in the murder of her husband. Fair statement?
That she said that she
Yes.
was involved. Yes, from the stuff, from the evidence that we had available, there was nothing found that she admitted to being a part of the murder.
And in the overhears that that we've just played to the jury over the last several days, and I understand your view of what she said in there might be different than mine, but my question is specific. Did you ever hear her say to Mr. Baker, "Why did we kill him? I wish we hadn't killed him," anything of that nature?
Not those words.
But the words that we all heard.
Yes.
Okay. If there had been anything more incriminating that she said on those overhears, it would have been played to the jury, correct?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. So you can say the jury heard everything that you and or the prosecution felt in any way was incriminating to her.
I would say 90% yes. But there wasn't an admission where she said, "I killed him." We would have played that.
Okay. Was there anything that was not played that had to do with control that Mr. Baker had over her?
There were some discussions about control, but they were always related to their sexual relationship.
Okay. And one time he uses the word master. Is that correct?
They used master back and forth.
Did you investigate Mr. Baker's background to determine whether or not he had a history of, for lack of a better term, controlling or manipulating women?
Well, if you would include the sexual assault of a minor as controlling, I would say yes.
Okay. So he had a prior conviction for the sexual assault of a minor, correct?
Yes.
Now, in all fairness, how old was the minor, if you recall, about?
I don't, how is that fair?
Well, I mean,
Said in
it
all
wasn't-
fairness.
No. I guess what I'm
I don't
saying
think it's
is,
fair, whatever age.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
But is it, what was it, a 6 or 7 year old, or was it a teenager? or what?
Teenager.
Okay, fine. Not,
No,
believe me,
right.
excusing that for a second. So, you had that in his background. Did you investigate the number of wives or girlfriends he had before Miss Sementilli?
I'm going to check the relevance.
Call a roll.
Yeah, I wouldn't say investigate, but it was part of the material, part of the investigation. I was aware that he had 2, maybe 3 wives. He was involved in the porn industry. He managed girls,
Dancers.
dancers, such.
So he pornography and strip clubs and things of that nature were in his background, correct?
Correct.
And you learned that from talking to friends of his, correct?
Correct.
Some of whom testified in this case.
Yes, and you can Google. You can get a lot on Google too, and I think his name comes up on Google.
Okay. The jury's not supposed to do that, so don't,
Okay.
don't say that. Okay. Then following the arrest of the 2 of them, well, let me ask you this. Were you aware that Detective Parshall, well, first of all, were you aware that Miss Sementilli was in Canada the day before she was arrested?
Yes.
Okay. And Detective Parshall called her, I assume, to kind of make sure she came back. And in fact, she had flown to Canada several times or during the course of the investigation and always came back, correct?
Correct.
A lot of those had to do with events involving Fabio, honoring him and so forth.
Correct.
But there's never any evidence she went to Canada and was going to stay there.
Right.
Okay. But Parshall told her basically the day before that she had been cleared finally and was going to get the insurance money, correct?
Correct.
And she did fly back, right?
Right.
And she contacted Mr. Baker, correct?
Yes.
And I assume that was significant to you,
Yes.
correct? Okay. And she also contacted her family, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you know if Mr. Baker upon hearing that, told anybody, boy, now we're free and clear, now we can go away, now we can get a house in Vegas, anything of that nature?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And the next day they're arrested in the Mustang.
Right.
There was also evidence introduced concerning a switch from Viber to WhatsApp, is that right?
Correct?
And that occurred, do you recall approximately when?
Yeah, I believe Baker downloaded it on the 25th, and
Of what?
I'm sorry, January 25th, 2017. I believe Monica downloaded it on January 30th or 31st of 2017, and Austin as well, all in that latter part of January.
And that was around the time WhatsApp was first made known to the public, correct?
I'm going to object that a call for speculation.
Sustained.
Did you determine whether or not, in fact, well, first of all, WhatsApp, I think you would agree, is not an app that's used primarily for criminals, is it?
I agree.
Viber is.
No, I think WhatsApp, Signal, Viber, it's just a choice of which one you want to use. They're all the same. They're encrypted. They all have the same scrambling technique where law enforcement can't get the messages.
But you're not saying it's not used by the general public in large numbers, are you?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have WhatsApp. I have Signal.
Okay. Did you know that the daughters, put in WhatsApp right about the same time that Monica did?
Assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
Did you investigate whether anyone in her family had in fact installed WhatsApp right about the time that she did?
No.
Were you aware that WhatsApp is a cheaper way of communicating across nations, like from LA to U.S. to Canada or not? Did you investigate that at all?
I know that it is, you can message free.
Okay. So it has innocent uses as well. Fair enough?
Yeah, but in the totality of what's happening at the time, and Viber no longer being used, and then WhatsApp being downloaded by all the parties involved in this case, it's no longer innocent to me.
Okay. But anything and everything relating to Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker following the murder was not innocent to you. Fair enough?
Well, again, it's whether it goes in the exclusion or the included box, and it's something that is just in the totality and with all the other evidence that was coming in,
But it
is suspicious.
could have innocent reasons as well. In other words,
For other people, for Jessica and Isabella, yes.
or someone else could be having an affair and not be a murderer, correct?
Oh, sure.
All right. So there's two reasonable explanations for having an affair. One that you could be a murderer and one that you could just be a
I
cheater.
think there's probably many different reasons people have an
Okay.
affair.
Fair enough. And your job in this case was to find those reasons, if you could, that pointed to her being a murderer.
Correct. No,
Okay.
no.
Involved.
It was to include or exclude, to find everybody responsible in the murder, not just focusing on Monica.
Let me ask you this. As a result of LAPD's decision not to arrest Mr. Baker immediately upon learning about his DNA, there were no search warrants issued for the search of his residence for almost 4 months eventually after he was arrested, correct?
Correct.
So for those 4 months, if he had any of the weapons or any other evidence of the murder, money, coins, anything, that was not available to LAPD, because if they issued a search warrant, it would be alerting him that you were investigating him and therefore destroyed the purpose of the 4-month surveillance.
Correct.
Okay. Now let's get back to the second murderer. When did you first have information that Mr. Austin was a suspect in this case?
That would have been in 2021, I believe.
Okay, and what was that evidence?
That was the, I wouldn't even call it, he was a suspect. He was somebody we looked at. His name first came up to my attention in 2021 when because of the Facebook Messenger message download WhatsApp, a couple days after the murder.
By Mr.
By
Austin?
Mr. Baker to Mr. Austin.
Okay. So he became what we hear sometimes as a person of interest.
Yeah, it was suspicious. We were looking for things that stood out in the phone records that was different from the normal.
Did you investigate as to whether or not he was in Los Angeles? Well, you knew he lived in Anchorage, correct?
At the time that we had that message, it was believed that he lived in Fayetteville.
In Arkansas?
Yes.
Okay. And Fayetteville?
Fayetteville, yeah, I always get it.
Okay.
Fayetteville, thank you.
But when did you learn that he actually resided in Anchorage?
In Anchorage, I believe it was the end, mid 2022.
And why did you believe he lived in Fayetteville?
That was information that when Cy came on the job, was helped out with the expert helped out with the phone records. One of the things we asked him to do was look at the phone records and identify numbers that stood out different from the normal patterns, like he talked about patterns of life or whatever. And there were 8 to 10 names that stood out in the phone records that were given to me.
As being
People that we should look at because the records most of them were like
communicated with Baker?
Communicating with Baker right after the murder, or communicating with Baker near the time of the murder when there was virtually no communication. So just things that were different from his normal phone activity.
But why would that lead you to Fayetteville?
There was Cy had done a little investigation, and that was the information that was given to me that I took, and I probably should have ran Mr. Austin at that point and just did my own due diligence, but I took that information and just ran with that information.
So the information from Cy Ray, is that who you're talking about?
Yes.
Was that the calls were being made to someone in Fayetteville?
No, that the message on Facebook Messenger was sent to Chris Austin, and that Chris Austin was either from or lived in Fayetteville.
So the information he gave you eventually turned out to be inaccurate?
Correct.
Okay.
So let me interrupt. I think we need a stretch. Let's get up.
Detective Roberts, when did LAPD become aware that there were two vehicles involved in this case, one being the victim's Porsche and one being another vehicle, I think a Nissan Versa, is that right?
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Compound, they're two different.
It's overruled.
I don't recall the exact date. I want to say it was in 2017, but I don't recall the exact date.
Okay. And how was that determined?
I believe that came from witness Paula McCullum, who in her statement said that she rented a car for Robert Baker.
On the day of the murder?
The day of the murder from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and then it was just backtracking from there.
That was a Nissan Versa, is that correct?
Correct.
Did you ever locate that vehicle?
Yeah, I did not, but the investigators did.
And it doesn't really have a trunk, does it? It's just like a hatchback back there. Isn't that right?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Did you take a picture of it, or?
There were pictures that were taken. The investigators tracked down the car. I believe it was in another state by the time they tracked it down. And they wrote a search warrant, and they went through the entire car. And I know there's pictures within the investigation of that car and the trunk area.
And she was tied to Mr. Baker, wasn't she?
Yes. Miss McCollum?
Yes.
Yes.
In fact, a girlfriend of his.
Well, I'm going to check. That calls for speculation, hearsay, and assumes facts not in evidence.
Just stand on the first ground.
Did you ever determine what her relationship was with Mr. Baker?
Same objection.
Oh,
I would call it friends with benefits. I wouldn't call it a girlfriend because she was married, but friends with benefits.
Okay, Mr. Baker had a lot of friends with benefits, didn't he?
I'm going to object. Assumes facts not in evidence.
sustained.
Was she interviewed by LAPD?
Yes.
Do you know if she's going to be a witness in this case?
I know she's on the...
Relevant, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Did she supply you with any information that Monica Sementilli was involved in the murder?
She provided us with circumstantial evidence that went in the inclusion box.
More circumstantial evidence.
Yes.
Talking about circumstantial evidence, you testified, I can't even remember because I know you've been on the stand off and on several days, but something to do with Mr. Baker being in a vehicle at Target, correct?
Correct.
And you showed video of the vehicle entering and moving and so forth, and then I think you testified to the fact that the vehicle ended up way in the back of a parking lot, way in the back of the Target lot. Is that correct?
At which, well, you could say that either parking spot was sort of towards the back. One was the side back, and one was sort of that little alcove in the very back towards that green container.
I'm sorry, what's our next?
That is 623. Please.
It is a photograph of it, looks like a building and some parking lot.
Very well.
I'm sorry, what number is
623, in fact, Your Honor, make it easier, there are 4 photographs. If they could be 623, you want to do 1, 2, 3, 4?
Well,
Or?
it'd be 623 completely, and you can have it A, B, and C, D, if you wish.
Yes, A, B, C, and D. I'm going to show you some photographs. You were at the Target parking lot, correct?
Yes, I went several times.
Obviously following the murder and when you became an investigator on it.
Yes.
Okay. And that was based on video that you had seen of cars going in and out of the parking lot, including those belonging to Ms. Sementilli and Mr. Baker, correct?
That was based on Monica Sementilli saying that she was at Target, and then also from the video that corroborated that.
Okay. Now I'm showing you 623, is that right?
It is.
Showing you 623A, do you recognize the scene in that photograph?
Yes.
And does that appear to be the location where Mr. Baker's vehicle ended up at some time in the Target parking lot, the date of the murder?
It does.
And I believe you testified that somehow he could have gotten from there to a location where Monica Sementilli's vehicle was near that Payless store without being seen by the Target cameras. Did I get that straight?
Without being picked up, yes.
Okay. But isn't it true that there's just no way to do that without going through or climbing fences or something like that?
That's not true.
Okay. So this is A. I'm going to show you B. Does that look familiar to you at all?
That looks like the area that, I guess, if you're facing it, that would be to the right of the alcove. But
Okay.
yeah,
And-
where the finger is right there, yes.
So it looks like it's locked. Was it locked the day that you went there?
I don't recall, but we didn't really pay attention to that. So actually, if I recall the day we went there, there may have been items placed in there, but that wasn't an area of interest to us.
Okay, let's go back to A then, Mr. Babich. And you're talking about him exiting this route. Is that correct?
That was one of the routes, or you can continue straight and walk through the parking lot.
You got a pointer there?
It did. I don't see it any longer. It's no longer here.
I don't know what this is, but you can use it.
That's it.
Okay. So can you show us, you described a circuitous route, it sounded like. Can you show us the route?
Well, this was,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to counsel's testimony and ask.
Sustained.
Can you show us on that
there were
photograph where you started at least from?
There were two routes. He would have started from here. He would have to jump this fence. There is a door in the interior here
Okay.
that you would have to go through. When we were there, it was unlocked.
But
An
if it was
interior
locked-
door.
I'm sorry, go on.
There was an interior door that was unlocked, and if you went through that interior door, it took you into the shopping center.
All right, let's look at this actually is D. That looks like it's looking at that gate from the other side, correct?
Right, correct.
So you'd have to walk, you're saying he could have walked down that road, that alleyway?
Yes, and there was a door on this side that was unlocked to go through.
Okay, but again, you're talking about how many years after the murder when you were there?
Well, it would have been 4 years after the murder.
Do you
But
have any-
there's also
Go on.
there's another easier way for him to go through that doesn't involve this alcove, and it's simply, if you can go to the first photo, if you walk just a short way through this parking lot, there's a driveway for vehicular traffic to go into that next shopping center. You can duck into that shopping center and then walk out to Ventura Boulevard.
Okay, but the photograph that's up there now, does that show where the car was parked?
The car was in that little alcove there.
Okay, so, and is that a location that the target cameras can capture, or could have, in the date in question?
It was so far away because it's at the farthest end of the parking lot,
Right.
that you could follow the car, because we saw the car leaving from where it was parked, and if you followed that car, it got blurrier as it traveled through the parking lot, but it ends up at this alcove.
Okay, but if the person I'm using my finger on 623A walked the way you said, would that not have been picked up by the target camera?
Jeff and asked and answered.
Maybe shadows, and I'd have to look again, but I believe it was too far away. Otherwise,
Otherwise, you would have been able to see it on the
I would have been
target.
able to testify to seeing it. I
Okay.
don't believe it picked up pedestrian traffic.
And that's one of the reasons, well, I'll withdraw that. Can we see the next photograph, Mr. Babbitt? This is E. Is this the door that you said was open, perhaps?
Perhaps, without seeing the entire,
Well, this is at the end of the, on D, the end of the walk.
I don't know what's around this corner here.
Around the corner, what if I told you that that's what's around the corner, that box and that little dead end?
I'm going to object that assumes facts, not an evidence.
Sustain.
Okay, but we could remove that. Could we put the first one up there again? But your theory is that Mr. Baker walked in front of the building to the left, as you showed us a second ago, not through the gate or over the gate going backwards.
That was always my opinion, that would be the easiest way to walk,
Okay.
without having to, like you said, jump fences or do things like that.
And then, can you tell us again then how he would get from there to where Monica Sementilli's vehicle was?
Do you have the photographs that?
Yes. Your Honor, we have marked as next 624 A, B, C, and D, Your Honor?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to show you in a second some photographs where I think you testified Mr. Baker could have ended up without being observed by the cameras.
Sure.
This is A. Now, there is a Payless store a little farther down in the middle of the photograph. Is that right? Or you tell me.
Well, there was.
There
And
was.
this is not, this is where he would end up if he, I can't really testify to this photo because this photo doesn't, except for this far end here where the Payless used to be, I think if I,
This better now? Is this B? This is from a more of a distance. Can you see?
For the record, which exhibit are those?
This is 624B.
On this photograph, can you see where Miss Sementilli was parked?
well, I'm trying to, if the entrance is here,
Okay.
is it? I mean, this is your photo, so I don't know how these photos were taken, so
It's actually Mr. Dawson's photo. So.
I don't know how these photos were taken, but
And he'll-
I believe this is the entrance.
yeah, see the sign up there that says Target? So
Yeah,
that
I believe
looks like,
she entered here. I mean, if you can zoom out, make it not so close. She came in here. This was the Payless at the time,
Okay.
and he came around that building, so he was on the back side of that building.
Well, you're
around here.
hypothesizing that's how he got. He didn't see
Your Honor,
him.
I'm going to object if the witness can just answer one.
One moment. Are you done with your answer?
Yes.
Continue, Mr. Lee.
Your testimony was where you thought his route could have been without being picked up by the target cameras, correct?
Yes.
You don't see him on any of the target cameras, and can't even see him getting into Miss Sementilli's car, correct?
We see somebody getting into Miss Sementilli's car.
You believe it shows somebody getting into the car?
I do.
Okay. And what about seeing that person before he gets into the car? Where's he coming from?
It's coming from that side of the Payless
And you
building.
can see that too?
Yes.
I see. Well, we'll get to that. You see was there a doctor's office that I'm showing you right now? You see the doctor's office sign? Was that Bahari, Bahari Medical Group?
Is this part of 624, counsel?
Yes. C.
Thank you.
Was that, you recognize that sign?
I recognize it from the current photos. I do not know if Bahari Medical Group was there in 2017 or if that was all part of the Payless.
Okay.
The strip mall has changed.
Of course. But you do know that there was a camera somewhere on that face of those buildings that would have picked up whether or not Mr. Baker got in or did not get into Miss Sementilli's car at the time of the day of the murder, correct?
I believe that there was a camera on that building. I do not know if it would have picked that up, but I do know there was a camera, and when they went back to that building, when they realized that that building may have been relevant, it had already been taped over.
And that was because it was only active occurrence for 30 days, correct?
Correct, that is my memory.
So you're saying it took over 30 days for them to determine that the Target parking lot was a important piece of evidence in the case?
I'm going to judge assumes facts, not evidence, and calls for speculation.
It is argumentative as well, so stand on the second ground as well as being argumentative.
Can you look at, Mr. Babbage is going to show you what looks to be maybe, no, leave that up there if you would, a little white, see that white camera?
I do.
And this is a current a photograph taken a few months ago. I take it you saw that camera there the day you were there?
I'm going to object assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustain?
Did you see that camera there the day that you were examining the scene?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, how did you know there was a camera that might have caught Mr. Baker if it had been accessed within 30 days in 2017?
I read that in the investigation.
Okay. So for whatever reason, no one asked about that camera until the tape was gone, correct?
I'm going to object assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustain?
Well, you didn't see anything in the investigative report that showed a video closer video of Ms. Sementilli's car and Mr. Baker getting into the car. You didn't see anything of that nature when you became the investigator, did you?
I don't believe that this whole area, that the investigators or anybody knew that that was even relevant at the time that they were out canvassing. They went out and they took several videos from the Target where Monica said she was that day.
Okay, but one of the videos showed her entering the Target and stopping in a parking place where you are claiming Mr. Baker entered, correct?
Yeah, I believe then after you see that video, then they go back and they realize we might need the video from Payless, and they went back and it was no longer there.
But they had interviewed her the day of the murder and knew that she had said voluntarily that she had been to Target and then Ralph's, correct?
Yeah, and so they went out to Target and then Ralph's and collected all the video. They didn't know that this specific corner would be so important
Okay,
until they viewed the surveillance.
so that, if it had been available, a camera might have been able to catch the actual location of where she was parked and confirm whether or not Mr. Baker entered or not.
Same objection.
Sustain?
Well, then, why does anyone care that it was over 30 days?
Same objection. Also irrelevant.
Overruled.
I guess I don't understand your
Well-
question. Why does anybody care that
Well,
it's
they-
over 30 days?
Didn't they go out and try to get the video from the camera on the medical group or the Payless?
Yes, once they determined that it was important because somebody got into Monica's truck, they went back to the Payless to collect video, and it was no longer available.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You didn't read, well, I'll withdraw that. Obviously, Ms. Sementilli was incarcerated when you came on the scene. But I think you read over the interviews of Ms. Sementilli by several officers or detectives in which she described her actions the day of the murder. Is that correct?
Yes?
I know there was one taken the day of the murder. She was interviewed, tape recorded. Do you know how many other times she was recorded and interviewed and recorded?
After her arrest or
No,
the entire
before,
thing?
after the murder.
After the murder.
Right, where you could learn what she had previously said about her actions and where she had driven and come from and came from and went the day of the murder?
I believe it was just the interview that upon her arrest, and then the Perkins, and then the overhears.
Well, but isn't it true that she was re-interviewed by Parshall or Tellis or Gable to take us again the route that you took Ralph's and Target and so forth to see if there was any inconsistencies in her statements? Wasn't that done?
Was it not on this? My recollection was on the same day of her arrest. I may be wrong.
Okay. But you opined, I think, that the time that she took getting from the Ralph's parking lot to her home took longer, the way she described it, than when you did the route, going many different routes, correct? Did I get that right?
I did do many different routes. I also took the route that she said, and I did it different times of day and on the same time of day.
For what purpose?
To try and see if it ever took me 11 minutes to get there.
Because it took 11 minutes for what?
For Mrs. Sementilli to get there.
Based on the route she said she took, correct?
Based on the time we know she left, the timestamp on the Ralph's video, and the time that Jessica's on the telephone and we hear Monica come home.
Okay. Now, did you have any video, or did the LAPD acquire any video from Ralph's that showed her leaving the Ralph's parking lot?
Not the parking lot, no.
You knew from the video what time she entered the store, correct?
Yes, and what time she left.
And what time she left, she was carrying some groceries, correct?
She was carrying one small bag of groceries.
Okay. And then she walks to her car. Do you see her get in her car?
No.
So when you're saying it took 11 minutes for her to get home, you're timing it from the time she leaves the scene of the camera, when she leaves Ralph, to the time she arrives at her residence.
Yes.
So you don't know what she did before she even got to her car, if anything, right?
Well, I do know she wasn't on the phone.
Okay.
From
you
the
don't know
phone
if she's
records.
smoking a cigarette?
I don't know if she was smoking a cigarette.
Okay. Or stopping for any other reason, or dropped her bag, or picked it up. You don't have any idea what she did before she got to her car, correct?
That's correct.
All you know is she was not on her phone.
Yes.
And then you don't know when she was driving. Well, let me ask you this. Do any of the surveillance cameras in the area, did they ever pick her up? That is, her car captured on video, leaving the Ralph's and tracking it until it got to the camera we know shows you coming up Oakdale, Queen Victoria, and into the driveway.
Yes. My recollection is that's the only video we have, is her coming back into the neighborhood.
So, again, you don't know what route she took coming home, correct?
Well, we know the route that she said she took.
Okay.
coming home.
You don't know if she stopped for any reason?
She didn't say she stopped for any reason.
Okay. And,
I believe she was asked
okay.
and did
But-
not say she did.
So you're saying, to be frank, she intentionally waited so she would not get there and see the murder taking place, right? Isn't that your hypothesis?
My hypothesis is that it took her 11 minutes to get somewhere that usually takes never more than 5, and it was very close in time that we see the suspects leaving. So,
That was suspicious to you.
yes.
So being in the interrupt, let's take our afternoon recess for 15 minutes. The admonition applies.